for Committee of the Whole, Monday, March the 14th. Happy birthday, Councillor Carlson. Is there anything else to add to the agenda? All right, so could I have adoption of the agenda? Councillor Van Elfen and Councillor Holmes, all in favor? Great, and we'll get right on to the new business, one item, 3.1, Okanagan Food and Innovation Hub Business Plan. I will start with the CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. We're pleased to come forward with an update on our work regarding the Food Hub. Food Hub is a strategic priority of Council, and while the district will not be operating the Food Hub, the intent of Council has been to support the research of the model, the identification of preferred governance models, and to seek grant funding that can support its creation to the benefit of the community. A business plan has been created which will help position the venture to qualify for grant funding, and a location and partner has already been decided by Council. The key next step will be to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Garnet Valley Ranch and Community Futures Okanagan-Similkameen that'll spell out the roles and responsibilities of the parties, agree to the location of the hub, and which will structure the relationship with the Garnet Valley Ranch as a host of the proposed food hub. Future steps will necessitate the acquisition of equipment and engaging in a lease for the food hub and a nonprofit to be set up to guide its operation. However, none of those steps will be taken unless and until significant grant funds are obtained. There is no financial obligation on the district and its ratepayers to fund the food hub. We believe this business plan and its proposed governance approach will help the concept gather the momentum needed to see it come to fruition. And with that, I'll turn it over to Director of Development Services, Mr. Brad Dolvett, to carry us through.
Thanks, Graham. Let's wait till the slides get on the screen here. And I'll just mention that I've got a short presentation, a few slides, and some of this will be repeated by Darren Stott from Green Chain Consulting is here with us today online. Maybe I'll just as well point out the other partners that are also on the line. We have Jane Campardo, which I think Council is familiar with, from Engage Business and People Solutions as a local contractor. We also have Charles Cornell as our project partner with the placement of the food hub within Summerland from Community Futures Okanagan-Similkameen. And then some other sub-consultants from Green Chain Consulting. We have David Van Steers and Janine de La Salle. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Sorry, Janine. And they're all here to help answer any of Council's questions as we move forward. Next slide, please. Thanks. So, as Council is aware, the placement of the South Okanagan Agricultural Food Hub within Summerland has been a strategic priority project of Council's since 2018. And in the last 4 years, Council has been working progressively towards that goal with trying to establish a regional food hub within the District of Summerland. And the goal of this food hub is to help provide community resiliency and sustainability by encouraging value-add processing of local food to meet regional market demand, which will in turn create less dependence on global food supply chains and also increase food security and food resiliency within our local region. The hub's mission is to build regional agri-food capacity and connect food and agri-tech entrepreneurs to the right resources so that they can develop and successfully commercialize and market new agri-food products within our region. And then as well, as a side benefit, the mission is also to help Okanagan communities, not just the District of Summerland, to become more food resilient and create a sustainable regional food system that's also ecologically resilient and economically robust in the face of changing dynamics in the global food supply chain. Background, just to get Council up to speed, March 2020, we did have the South Okanagan Food Hub business plan prepared by Engage Business and People Solutions. But following the completion of this business plan, some of the grant funding sources that we were looking for were unfortunately stalled due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the onset of that pandemic happening the month thereafter in April 2020. And so there was a period of time there that there was a lack of funding resources to this type of a project. In July of 2021, ETSI, which is the Economic Trust of Southern Ontario, we were successful in securing some additional grant funding of $37,600 to complete pre-feasibility activities for the food hub. And I'll just list those activities out. The goal of these activities was to create and manage an expression of interest process for the land building partner for the food hub, to confirm the partnership agreement with this land building partner of the food hub, and also to revise the Okanagan Food and Innovation Hub business plan to reflect the land building partner, but also potentially phase down and create a scaled down version of the hub to make it easier to implement at the onset, which is part of the discussion today. Following that expression of interest process, in December of 2021, a council's meeting, we recommended to council that we enter a conditional agreement with Okanagan Crush Pad to locate the food hub at 26405 Garnet Valley Road. At that meeting, council provided direction to staff to negotiate a partnership agreement with Okanagan Crush Pad at that location at 26405, but as well to report back to council on this draft partnership agreement prior to its execution. And that's actually the subject of the item that's going to afternoon council today, is the memorandum of understanding that we are proposing the district sign in collaboration with Garnet Valley Ranch, which is a company that's owned by Okanagan Crush Pad, and also Community Futures Okanagan Similkameen as our third project partner on placing the food hub at 26405 Garnet Valley Road. So again, Darren will be going into these items in a little more detail, but I just want to highlight from staff's perspective a couple of key points of the proposed business plan for the food hub. This business plan is conceptual only, so to keep that in mind as Darren's going through it, it can change, and it probably will change, to be honest, with regards to the successful grant applications that we're able to secure for the food hub. Depending on the requirements of the different grant funding agencies, there might be some tweaks made to the business plan as we've done historically with it, as well as moving forward. I've already mentioned the partnership memorandum of understanding. It's proposed to go to council this afternoon. That MOU provides no financial commitments to the district at this point in time. Right now, what we are committing to is staff resources and in-kind support only, continuing on pursuing this as a strategic project of council's, continuing to support our project partners, being Okanagan Crush Pad, Garnet Valley Ranch, but also Community Futures Okanagan Similkameen. The business plan itself as well is conditional on higher level funding, which Darren will get into. But I want to be clear with council that this is not a viable for-profit business. It could be at one point in time, but at this point in time, it is relying on higher level funding for it to be sustainable. And it's estimated that we require $2.25 million in secured grant funding over a 5-year time period to move forward with the business plan and actually move forward with constructing the food hub. However, despite all that, despite that the business plan is conditional on higher level funding, by year 5 of operation of the Okanagan Food Innovation Hub, the economic impact of the food hub is on the wider Okanagan regional food economy is projected to directly contribute to regional food sales by over $12 million per year. So with that projection, it's good to keep in mind that this is an investment. This is an investment of grant funding to a more sustainable future of our regional food system. We see this project as being the key important ingredient to encouraging more of this economic projection going to our local food farmers and also our local food processors and producers within our region, and over to the tune of $12 million per year. And with regards to governance, again, just some high-level items here for council's consideration. Hybrid non-profit trust structure is what's being proposed in the business plan. It's a two-tiered type of business structure, with a trust being the first entity to be entered into by both the District of Summerland and Community Futures Okanagan-Similkameen as trustees. This will allow the district to apply for a higher level grant funding and also potentially purchase capital equipment assets once we have funding secured and within this trust format before setting up the not-for-profit agency. A couple of comments too with regards to the trust. Both the CFOS as well as the District of Summerland are committed long-term on a food hub being established and operating within Summerland. The trust will also give granting agencies comfort that the grants that will be provided to the trust will be used most efficiently and used for public benefit purposes, as opposed to a recently established nonprofit agency, may not be as secure of a grant fund in terms of it being provided funding. With regards to the nonprofit agency, it's proposed that it would be the main operator of the food hub. It'll collect revenue from users and pay for the operating expenses of the food hub. This could include the lease with the landlord, being Garnet Valley Ranch, but also a potential lease for equipment that we would be purchasing in the trust, and a lease arrangement with the trust in operating and maintaining that equipment. It's proposed as well for next steps. The trust will be set up immediately. If council decides to move forward with the MOU at today's meeting, and then the not-for-profit agency will not be initiated though until higher level funding is achieved. And then finally, the not-for-profit agency would be governed by a separate board of directors, which would have key business users as well as business industry partners sitting on the board. And it's believed that the food hub not-for-profit agency is better served having shareholders of this board of directors having a vested interest in seeing it being successful. So even some key core users of the food hub could sit as a member of the board of directors to ensure that the project will be successful as it moves forward with its business plan. Last slide here, just some next steps with regards to the District of Summerland activities and CFOS. We want to establish this trust, as I already mentioned. We're working in collaboration with CFOS on a potential grant application to Pacific Canada, which is a federal level funding opportunity. We're continuing to have and will still have discussions with the Ministry of Agriculture on potential grant funding programs, including the Food Hub Network program that the province has. We also want to support Okanagan Crush Pad with their development approvals process, including an Agricultural Land Commission approval. But again, as a final point here to council, at this point in time, we're not recommending no hiring of staff or no financial expenditure on behalf of the district until higher level grant funds are in place from other sources. And with that, I'm happy to pass the baton over to Darren to continue with our presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Am I sharing my slides here, or are the slides coming up?
I think that'd be best, Darren, if you can.
Okay. Just bear with me a second. Okay, Brad, can you just confirm that you can see those slides okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Great. So yeah, thanks, Brad, for that. And thanks, Mayor and Council, for having along presenting today. So I presented back in December with Brad And as Brad mentioned, I'm joined with David Van Cedars from Sustainability Ventures and Janine de La Salle from Urban Food Strategies. And so we all work together on food hubs well over 10 years and worked on a lot of food hub projects around BC and part of the BC Food Hub Network that the Ministry of Agriculture has been supporting, as well as others. And we've been working alongside Jane Campado from Engage, who, as you all know, worked on the project back in 2018, 2019, and put the initial business plan together. And then we took over the reins over the past year and to develop it further. But Jane is joining us today for any questions that we might have at the end, as Jane did a lot of the engagement with the initial business plan, and obviously is very familiar with the region. And we also engaged Motive Architects as well. So when we submitted a proposal and looked at what was needed for this project, with other projects that we worked on, we identified that what would really help move the project forward was start to visualize what the food could look like. So you can see a drawing here, and Janine will be highlighting a layout of the food hub as well, and that we've been working on with Okanagan Crush Pad. And it really helped the project come alive and start to visualize what could be done and could not be done, and what needed to be done in particular in that location. Okay, so so as Brad mentioned, so we'll be going over some of the things that Brad mentioned before, but hopefully just cover off some more details. So what we did over the project was through a request for expression of interest, we selected Okanagan Crush Pad as a developer and landlord of the food hub and established an MOU with Okanagan Crush Pad, the district and community futures, Okanagan Similkameen. And so we talked about that initiative back in December, and the process we went through, and the interest that we had, and some of the other applicants as well, and who we interviewed. We developed schematic plans of the food hub, outlining its size, layout, and site position. So as I mentioned before, that was with Motive Architects, and Janine will go over that. And we created a hybrid nonprofit trust governance through a lot of consulting, in particular with Charles at Community Futures there, who came up with this idea here and how it could really work with a partnership between the two organizations and maybe others. And as Brad mentioned, that was really to create a body that could house the grant funds coming into the project and invest that moving forward with equipment and working with the Okanagan Crush Pad. We revised the 5-year business plan, adopting a phased expansion model. So just building on the scope at the side of the project, understanding that the original plan maybe had needed a bit too much investment, and maybe it was a bit too large initially. So we revised that with the help of Jane to understand how we could work that down, as well as engaging with the primary users as well. And so we managed to reduce the grant funding required for that from 4.6 million to 2.75, so 2.25 of grant funding, and then hopefully the rest would be through loans. And with all that, we developed a business plan, which had a market overview, operations plan, which included the facility layout, marketing plan, governance and management plan, financial plan, a risk mitigation plan, as well as an implementation plan. And so we'll go over some of these in the presentation today. So the market overview. We kind of provided a highlight of an overview of food hubs within North America. There's around about 350 distribution hubs, and a lot more that would consider themselves kind of providing commercial kitchen and processing space as well. So lots of success stories out there, and the team are very familiar with a lot of these, and we brought some of those best practices into the business plan. But what we wanted to understand is the impact on the community. Are these kind of established business models, and do they do what we want them to do within the community of and the region of the Okanagan? And so what we also identified is the 11 food hubs that are established in BC, and the support that the ministry is giving them with the BC Food Hub Network, and how they're being established across BC, and what they're doing for their community, as well as their processors, and also the ones that are close by. So one in Rock Creek and one at Salmon Arm as well, and what services they're providing, and making sure there was no duplication there. And we identified that there's 260 food processors within the Okanagan, and most of these are small and medium-sized businesses. As I mentioned before, Jane did a lot of engagement before we joined the project and really understood that not only are these businesses thriving and doing really well and growing, but also there's a real need for some of the services that a food hub would provide to help them grow to the next level. A lot of them are processing on site on their own farm or in their own facilities or in small community kitchens in churches, for example, and really have an opportunity. In fact, some of them are even processing in Alberta and want to process here in the Okanagan and grow and supply bigger markets, wholesale markets. And so these market needs for these producers and processors. So we identified a range of food processing equipment. I mean, I should say Jane identified that with loads of engagement conversations. What we did, we re-engaged with them because obviously a couple of years has went past. And in particular, we identified the core users who would invest in something like this and would use it on a frequent basis. And so with that, we solidified what actual equipment they would need. What type of facility would they need? So a HACCP certified facility. And this allows them to supply major institutions, large retailers, hospitals, and universities and such that do require that type of certification. Co-packing services were a new service that we identified that was needed more so than what we thought before. So that means that a raw product would be dropped off at the food hub and the food hub staff would actually do the processing and packaging on behalf of the grower or the processor and then give them the product back and then they would market that product. We're seeing this becoming more popular with the food hubs, in particular Plenty of Grace in Surrey, that is part of the food hub network. Shared marketing, sales and distribution services. A one-stop referral service for technical and business knowledge. So becoming that kind of incubator and providing training for these small and medium-sized businesses and steering around regulations and understanding marketing and how to sell their product. And having collaboration and partnerships amongst each other as well to enhance their service and sales. So the operations plan. So phase one is the pre-launch planning stage. This is where we're at already. And this will continue moving forward until the project is put on hold or until we can't get any funding, but hopefully we'll get that funding. So this is a large undertaking and will need to be steered by a project manager who is well connected in the regional agri-food industry. And the top priority for the project manager will be to secure the funding from various sources to cover the cost to set up the facility and cover operational losses for the first year or two. And as Brad alluded to, Pacifican is one that we're working on right now. And these grant applications do take a lot of time and resources, and Community Futures has been really great helping us out with that, as well as Brad's staff. And then once that funding is secured, as Brad mentioned, only if it's secured and only if there's enough has been secured, it's not just granting as well, it's also from potential sponsors. So we've been having some really great conversations with businesses within the region and also the actual potential core users themselves. And we asked them if they would invest in something like this. And that investment might be something like, you know, paying it forward with membership that they would recoup on a discount on services. Or maybe it would be a loan to the food hub as well if they so had that capacity to do that. And so we got a real strong feedback from those core users that they would do this because obviously it would be an investment in their business and hence why we feel quite confident in the business plan and model. So we've moved on to phase two. So the second phase represents the first year of operations once a food hub is built. To help manage costs and based on the needs of the core users, the food hub will provide an initial set of programs and services. So this is this phased approach that we mentioned before to help manage the costs of the business, to help work with a landlord as well to make sure enough rent is paid. We are, and Janine will talk about this, in this phase, we don't want to take over the whole facility. We want to do some subleasing and then eventually grow into the whole facility. Phase three, so as the food hub becomes established and we understand the client's needs, and obviously those clients' needs are growing and the number of clients is growing, so then we can expand and hopefully take over the whole facility. area, purchase even larger processing and more specialized equipment. And obviously we will charge higher fees to rent that out or to do the co-packing of that. Phase 4, as you can imagine, we've got more food processing going on. We've got more food processors coming to the hub, becoming a one-stop shop. And so therefore we can start to expand, for example, distribution services, maybe working with third parties to distribute the product across Canada and maybe even into the States as well. And then by year 5, the food hub will hopefully become a one-stop shop for food processors, offering all the services and facilities that would need to get the product to market, and maybe even introducing additional services such as food testing. And we even discuss an actual food retail or maybe in a food service facility on site as well, which Janine will briefly touch on. So as I mentioned, these are the key programs and services. So commercial kitchen and processing facility. So allowing different scales of processing going on. So commercial kitchen, it might be like a business that's owned by one person and they just need to prep some food to be sold that day. Whereas a processing facility allows processing of food at a volume that could be packaged and maybe stacked onto pallets and distributed throughout the region, maybe even BC, and exported down to the States and other provinces as well. Storage services on site, so that would be frozen storage, chilled storage as well, refrigeration, as well as dried storage that all the clients could store over a longer period of time. If you imagine co-packing services or processing, they might process at a volume, but then they would distribute that over a course of maybe a week or a few months. And so then you would store that. Co-packing services, as I mentioned before, brokering, distribution, and online sales as well, and setting those aggregation services and representing all the businesses through one entity, the Food Hub. Business advice and technical training, equipment rentals as well. So we identified that there was a need for equipment rentals. So not just coming to the facility and renting equipment at the facility and renting the facility itself, but even taking equipment away to do at their own facility, or maybe even farming equipment. So we identified things like seed cleaning as well that might have been needed. And that is something that you would do on site in situ, not actually at the Food Hub. And then food testing laboratory services, as I mentioned before, at the end. So I'm going to pass it on to Janine, who's going to talk about the location and the facility layout itself, and briefly go over the marketing plan. And then Janine is going to pass it on to David to go over the financing and governance. And then David will pass it back to me. Thanks. So
Thanks,
Janine, if you tell me next slide and I'll change it.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, all. Thanks for having us. It's great to be here presenting at this stage of the process. As Darren mentioned, I'm going to go through some of the more physical layout pieces. And I just want to acknowledge Steve Lorney. He's been great to collaborate with in this process. And our architects Motive aren't on the call today, but they've also been great to work with. So this has been quite collaborative. And what I'm about to present is there has been a real back and forth between the design and the financials, so that we've done our best so that they're actually talking to each other. We didn't, just want the designers to just do something pretty up. We wanted to actually work through the spatial considerations so that it's not design ready. It's not, you can't go and, these aren't blueprints, but they do give us a way better sense of, what this thing could look like. So as we've mentioned, we've got the red circle on the map here. You probably all know where Garnet Valley Ranch is, on Garnet Valley Road there. And the site that we're looking at for the building is just off of the kind of main road up the driveway there. So it would be somewhat visible from Garnet Valley Road. This location's about 10 kilometers from the highway, from Highway 97. And when we checked in with our list of folks who are, I shouldn't say folks, I should say businesses who are very keen to be part of this and use this facility, for all intents and purposes, they were okay with that distance. That was not kind of a negative for them. And so that was an important thing to check on, just in terms of this location and its starting point. So we'll do next slide, please. So this is a bird's eye view of the layout, and don't get distracted by all the tiny writing. You will have an opportunity to see this in more visible detail in the printed document or on your own computer when you can zoom in. But what we want to show here is the whole facility. So you can see the outline of the whole facility. It's sort of an awkward U shape. And thanks, Darren. And the parts that aren't colored in are the parts that Okanagan Crush Pad would be taking over, which includes a part for a locomotive as well, which is, as you may know, a local company doing box programs, and they are actively growing food at Garnet Valley Ranch. So this would be in part used by them. So our section for the Okanagan Food Innovation Hub is this colored section here. And we've got all of the service areas that Darren just went through. They're all located in here and shown in here. This is what you're seeing in this diagram is the complete build out. So prior to this, as David may speak to in the business plan, we do have a phased approach where a portion of the aggregation space would be leased out to a different party as the food hub, establishes its user group, its customer base, and starts to grow. There's a plan for part of that to be leased out, prior to that space being needed by Okanagan Food Innovation Hub tenants, I guess we could call them even. Tenants, users, customers, I'm using those all interchangeably. I think our next slide will show, I should mention the whole facility at this time, and this is again going back and forth, way up to the deep levels of the financials, way into the design, and of course, all through the lens of Okanagan Crush Pad and the site realities. We're looking at this entire facility being about 29,000 square feet, and the food hub component would be approximately 10,000 square feet of that. And so we've got some nice drawing over here. I don't know if we can erase those loops. Thanks, Darren. So here we just have a closer look, a zoomed in look at the food hub specific area. And again, we're not going to present this, in great detail to you, but we do want to show you the level of detail that we were able to achieve through this exercise. And you can see all the things that we were speaking about in terms of the service areas, the processing kitchen, the food processing line, the wet line, dry line, the cold storage, the frozen storage, aggregation, packing, dry storage, and combined. Areas are all shown in here, and some of the other uses that are not necessarily directly related to space requirement like that, like business support services, we've shown, that would be happening in the boardrooms and the offices that are to the left. We have, kind of a public facing out, entrance. So if there's, say workshops happening here for food entrepreneurs, the parking is oriented to the front of the building. The front of the building allows for, some great signage and sort of placemaking elements, so that it is this facility is very much a combination of businesses using the space, a certain amount of public coming here for different things, potentially coming to the retail space to buy, the newest line of marinades and sauces that are being produced here. But it's also a mix of very straight up business. So we've got trucks coming in, and we've cropped this just for scale, but where Darren's pointer is right now, that's where the loading dock would be. That's where the trucks would come in, back up to the warehouse space to unload and load product. So we've considered the movement of goods in this design. We've considered, where things need to be located just to maximize efficiencies and, make it so it's sort of a workable space that makes sense. And David and Darren both have a long experience working in warehouses, so we have a sense of, what works and what doesn't work in this kind of scenario. And so if we zoom out to sort of just what does this sort of look like? What's the orientation of this? this is sort of the awkward U shape that I mentioned, and the colored in area is sort of the 10,000 square feet or so of the food hub specific space. And then that kind of hockey stick shape is the Okanagan crush pad space. It's all connected, it's sharing all the same infrastructure and roof and everything. So because there's that level of kind of partnership initially, there's a lot of efficiencies gained as opposed to building a food hub facility all by itself. So there's a real asset in working with OCP on this. You can see a little public realm treatment there. The road would need to be adjusted in order to fit through in here. But it's all, from a high level of design, is all very possible and very feasible from this standpoint. We do have to be a little bit careful of slopes in here because there are some steep slopes and some bedrock that we need to build around, but it's workable. It's workable. One thing to note, and without going into great detail, Brad did mention ALC process. ALC does seem long-term leases as like longer than 5 years as subdivisions. So it's likely that a subdivision application would need to be submitted for this project. And the timeline on that is, optimistically, it's about 6 to 8 months. So that'll impact the overall timeline. And we do have a slide to present the kind of high level timeline that it kind of acknowledges that component. Also, there's further conversations to be had with ALC in terms of just confirming those requirements and rolling in road upgrades into the subdivision application is possible. So there's some opportunity to streamline that aspect of the approvals process. And then when we're talking about the marketing plan, what we're really zeroing in here on those unique sales propositions, and these are kind of the framework that we would, do pitch work, whether that's writing a grant, pitching to potential investors who may be users of the space or may just see a value in investing in this type of business. So the main kind of crux of the unique selling propositions include a full suite of services and equipment in one facility. So you're not driving around to different parts of town or the region to do your business. Ability to scale up hobby scale food enterprise with a full set of services. So for those businesses that have been, smaller scale, selling at farmers markets and finding some success there, this will help them get to the next level of production and of scale. With processing, there's a massive jump between a farmers market scale and the next scale of commercial processing. So that's why this investment is critical to enable those businesses to get there. Providing brokerage and distribution services for users, and providing a HACCP certification support in a HACCP certified facility. And for those of you who may not know HACCP, I don't know it well either, but it's really something that will help to, if you have that certification, you have an easier time selling your product and creating markets and newer areas like institutional procurement, for example, or out of province sales. The HACCP is a requirement oftentimes with those markets. So there is a level of interest in HACCP certification here. Reduce costs through access to shared equipment and services. As opposed to everyone building their own commercial kitchen, you're all pitching in and sharing a service, which reduces cost and risk, but increases the need for group work and collaboration to a certain level. A supportive environment with a dedicated support team and a geographic area with a strong local food culture and excellent climate. In addition to that, just in speaking with the ALC, they do take into consideration some of the higher level pieces as well, which includes, resiliency in the food system in local areas. We saw those supply chain disruptions with the floods this year and with fires. So there's a real interest there, reducing carbon emissions, and all sorts of the other things we can attach to this are of interest to not only the ALC, but the provincial government. So that's also part of that sales pitch in terms of what makes this a special and very needed and valuable project idea.
Okay, I'm going to take over from this point. Brad did a great job of sort of talking about the high-level governance process. So I'll just reiterate the key points of the idea of establishing a trust so that it can receive the grant funds and then use that to purchase some of the initial equipment and that hold that in trust until there's confidence that the hub can move forward. And then even then to then make sure that the board is in place, that plans are well in place before those assets are then transferred over into the hub. And the nonprofit organization with a strong board made up of core users as well as other stakeholders, and likely to include the District of Summerland and Community Futures would be invited to participate in that, but definitely they would be a key to the trust. So those are the key points of that. So let's move on to the financials. And I want to just acknowledge the great work that Jane did on her initial set of financials, since that really helped give us a strong foundation. Of course, those financials were based on a different location that couldn't move forward because of the pandemic. And so there's definitely a lot of refinement, but it was built off the really strong base that she did. So here I just want to present, so the startup costs, what we're looking at in terms of soft costs, the planning costs, around 300,000 to 400,000, or 31% of the total. Another third is for the leasehold improvements. Of course, Okanagan Crush Pad will build the shell of the building, but then we have to demise the walls and where the washrooms are and the offices are and all that, and all those leasehold improvements that are sort of built in. That's another third of the 30% of the costs. And then, of course, you have to outfit each of the spaces, furniture in the office area, vents and hoods in the commercial kitchen area, food processing area, walls and washing stations and grease traps and things like that. All of that adds up to between 1.1 million and 1.3 million of startup costs before the doors open. Next slide. So then, in addition, there will be in years 2 to 5 additional services added and additional capital costs. Starting with a wet processing line at startup, but then adding a dry processing line, and then adding a primary production processing line for agricultural producers, and then a food testing lab. And then another element is that we've got a 10,000 square foot space, but we're starting with a 7,000 square foot space for the hub, and then subletting 3,000 square foot of that to dedicated users, so that they are helping to cover those rent costs until the hub expands with these additional services to then take over the full 10,000 square foot space. So that's another $800,000 to $1 million of capital costs. So how does this work on the in the actual operating revenues? So the revenues, we've got them projected starting at around 400,000. You can see in the top row, building up to about just under 2 million. We expect that there will be operational losses in the first 3 years on a declining basis, starting with about 350,000 and then down to 50,000, and then becoming profitable in year 4, and then building up so that we're somewhere around a 6 to 8% profit from that standpoint. And so those losses add up to about 550,000, so that we also need to make a plan for raising money for that. So just to say though that for this, once we get to the year 5 and this $160,000 operating profit, these are the fees that the users are going to pay, but then they are going to be able to sell so much more product. And I'm actually a little bit more optimistic than Brad. Brad said 12 million, but I actually think it would be closer to 13 million at year 5. And then it will build from there. So that's how much the local food economy will be able to be expanded from the direct result of this food hub. And certainly in future years beyond that, it should grow even higher. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so all of this adds up to needing to raise about 2.25 million in grant funds and another $500,000 in loans. And those loans will likely be secured by the physical assets that are purchased through the grant funds to make this work. So what we try to do is to come up with one possible funding scenario. We've already received a commitment of 50,000 from the Regional District of South Okanagan. Then we can have some matching funds from CFOS, from Accelerate Okanagan and other local governments to bring in another amount. A big chunk we're hoping will come from the Pacific Can Jobs and Growth Fund, which funds up to $2 million. And then the Ministry of Agriculture, generally they're in the area of 250,000, so pushing that to 300,000. The Social Finance Low Interest Loan Fund, which will allow sort of forgiveness of loans as well. And then some foundations interested in local food. So that's how the grant money could add up, recognizing that we're looking to raise about 1.25 million for startup, and then the remainder of that over 5 years to get to the total 2.25 million. And then in addition, about $500,000 that could come from loans from the core users, where they provide a loan and get paid back over 5 years. Community Futures has a loan fund that we could take advantage of, individual or company loans, and then a bank line of credit, likely secured against some of the assets. So it will probably be something different than this, but this is a reasonable scenario to think that, yes, there is a possibility that a good possibility that we can raise these. And there's even other flexibility. If we're short a little bit, we could go to the landlord and say, maybe you could cover some of these capital costs and then just put that into the rental rate, and we solve it that way. Or we downscale and don't go for a 10,000 square foot place, but go for a slightly smaller one. So there's flexibility, but this seems reasonable, and it's the one we want to recommend going forward with. And then back to you, Darren.
Thanks, David. So the last slide before we go on to questions is just what the next 4 months look like. In the business plan, we lay out an implementation plan for the next 2 years, building on what Jane did with the original business plan, and it is quite detailed. But obviously, the next 4 months are really essential for the project to be moving forward. So finalizing the business plan, which is where we're at now, as well as the partnership between the district, Community Futures, and Okanagan Crush Pad with the Memorandum of Understanding, which you're discussing this afternoon. And as Janine mentioned, there's a lot of work to be done with the ALC and their regulations with the site. Creating the trust obviously will take a couple of months, and that is going to be in parallel with applying for funding, which is already going on right now. So if we're successful in securing the funding, then we can house that within the trust before we make a decision to move ahead with the hub and start buying equipment and start construction. If we're confident that we're going to get enough funding and then to start re-engaging with the potential core users, we identified around about a dozen core users that would use the facility, that would invest in the facility, and therefore would kind of direct the equipment that would be needed and direct the services in the initial year. So once that financial funding has all been secured from the key partners that we're hoping around about June, then as we mentioned before, we would create the nonprofit that would operate the food hub. and start employing staff. And then hopefully this year we could maybe invite the potential core users as well as other key partners, potential funders, maybe have a meeting, a discussion, maybe at the district of Summerland, and potentially go and visit the site at OCP. Obviously, we're a long way off before construction is happening, but it'd be good to kind of get together, present some of the architectural drawings that Motive did, and maybe even present some of the highlights of the business plan to those partners as well, and start to engage them. And those might include sponsors as well. So assuming all the above tasks are met on time, especially the funding and the ALR regulations around the subdivision by September 2022, the goal would be to open the food hub towards the end of 2023, just bearing in mind construction and weather and when people could be ready, and building capacity up for spring 2024. So maybe a soft opening in December 2023. And then, once businesses start to get established and the product is started to be processed and ramp up the sales in spring 2024. Obviously, that if enough financing has been secured, and then we can only move forward with the food hub after that. Okay, so this section is questions, and this is where we invite Jane to help us out here, and maybe Charles can chip in as well.
Great, thank you so much for your presentation. Let's start with Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate it. Obvious question, my first question, I don't mean to start off Mr. Negative, but what if the farm is sold? What if Okanagan Crush Pad decides to sell the Garnet Valley Ranch holdings? Then what?
I can speak that any lease would be registered on title. At least that's the way that I would recommend it be done. And then the new owner would be obligated to fulfill the lease requirements.
But we haven't discussed lease terms or lengths of leases yet. Am I correct?
We have a sample offered a lease, which he's generally in favor of. What we would say is that in this particular case, what really builds momentum is that Steve is very keen about building this building for his own space, recognizing that we're taking 10,000 square feet of 29,000 that he is mostly using for his operations. And so he's going to have his own risk building that facility if he's then planning to sell it. So that really makes us feel like he has a very strong long-term interest, and he has very specific ideas of what he needs. And he's on a 325-acre property, and I think he's now producing on maybe 60 acres. So he is definitely going to be expanding on that property, and that facility, that the portion that he will use, is going to be very vital for processing the grapes that he expands into over the years.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I could continue on, I just happen to be a resident out in Garnet Valley, and I've seen what's happened over there over the past bunch of years. And the biggest project we had, thank God to the previous councils and this council, or the other council, excuse me, Madam Mayor, was the water twinning project. From my recollection and conversations back then with contractor stuff, I believe it's a 6-inch water main that runs to Wild Horse Road. And from Wild Horse Road on, it's a 3-inch water main. Now that water main was downsized and sized for the homes and domestic water out past Wild Horse, including any potential other housing that may go on some vacant lands. Now the ALC has, as of January 1st, said that you can put in a secondary dwelling on these farms. Is that enough? Is we going to have enough water to run a food hub out there?
I think this question is for Brad. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Van Alphen, and through your worship. I think that's one of the technical requirements that Okanagan Crush Pad has to wade through. As part of the draft memorandum of understanding, obtaining their approvals for the placement of the food hub is still their requirement, including the ALC approval, which is what Janine already mentioned, but also the approvals from us with regards to water. And we've had some preliminary conversations with the owner on that specific issue on water, and I understand that he is researching his options on that, not just for this facility and for his own needs for his production facility, but also I think he has other buildings proposed on site, and so he'll definitely need domestic water service. So I think that is something that's still to be determined by him.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just follow up. I think Janine had mentioned earlier something about road upgrades. I don't know if that was on site, but again, from Wild Horse on north, that road was built to absolute minimum standards. Like it is legal and it's on the proper road base, but it is very narrow. And I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention also because it is part of the bike route from the north through that area. And even where Garnet Valley, let's say from Wild Horse south to town is a little sketchy when it comes to bike lanes. So I just wanted to bring that up too. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Did you care to comment on that, Brad, or it's just, just for information? Okay, next person is Councillor Patton and then Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One of my questions was answered, but it brought up another question. So if we're looking at 19,000 square feet for the Okanagan Crush Pad, that would be their component if we're at 29,000 for an overall build. So at 19,000, and infrastructure costs for water upgrades could be very significant. If this doesn't go forward, how does this affect a trust that we are going to be talking about today and later today in regards to this project moving forward? Because it seems like it hinges on Okanagan Crush Pad, and it seems like the other hinge here is that, and it was a great point that Councillor Van Elfen brought up, is that at 29,000 feet, and we also have to keep in mind that we are talking that this building is in a wildfire interface area, so it will require sprinklering in that respect also. So I'm just kind of, I'm not sure who can answer my question, but I'm just wondering if the infrastructure costs are too much to move forward for Okanagan Crush Pad, what happens with the project? Thanks.
Brad?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Patton, for the question, and through Mayor Boot. That's a great question. So the agreement we have right now is going to the afternoon council is a memorandum of understanding only at this point in time. It's for all three parties, Okanagan Crush Pad, Community Futures, Okanagan Smilkmeme, and also the District of Summerland to pursue together the placement of the food hub at this specific location at 26405 Garnet Valley Road. But that's the extent of that our three-party relationship. There's nothing within the MOU that actually states anything with regards to the creation of a trust. That is a proposed activity we want to get to move forward with just Community Futures, Okanagan Similkameen only as being part of this trust. And that wouldn't be a legal entity that Okanagan Crush Pad or Garnet Valley Ranch would be a party to, of just being the landlord of this food hub. So worst comes to worst, say in that scenario, say that the technical requirements of placing the food hub is unachievable due to costs, then I think it'd be up to the trust to decide to consider a different location. I think that would be the approach forward. But a lot of the merits of this business plan will still be applicable to wherever that new location is. And the work that's gone into date in developing this business plan is still going to be of value and of merit in moving forward with, no matter where this is located. We wanted greater certainty with regards to the land building partner, and that was one of the key activities of this proposed scope of work for Green Chain, in order to get us more ready for grant funding agencies in submitting our proposal to them. And it does create a lot more certainty as well what's going to occur once we secure additional grant funding. If it is unachievable at this location, we can pivot. The trust will still create, and also the business plan will still give us the mandate to move forward with the project at a different location at that point in time. But again, we're hoping that doesn't happen.
Do you have a follow-up? You're good? Thank you. Thanks, Brad. Now to Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think my question is probably more for the folks at Green Chain. I know that you've been involved in some of the previous Food Hub and Food Network projects, and that I know there's 11 now running in the province. The commissary in Vancouver was kind of where this all started, and I understand they're quite successful, but that's very urban and very city-centric farmers markets with large populations, et cetera. And so I guess my question is that this has been something that's been talked about for a long time. There's some really good examples out there, and there's some very new examples out there. And you've shown us lots of numbers based on what the potential could be for revenue. I'm just wondering if it's actually working. Are there some, there's Quesnel, there's a few on the island. Is there some proof now that this investment and this strategic goal of the Minister of Agriculture is a good one, and that people are getting on board and that businesses are finding use in having these hubs?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think it's still early days. We are seeing some success, like you say, with Commissary Connect and others. And some of them are in more rural areas. And as we have put into our financial plan, the revenues, do take a while, more than a year to build up, and hence why it's predominantly a not-for-profit model for that reason. The first year or two, these hubs do tend to make a loss and need to have that covered. And as the momentum builds up, not only are there 11 in BC, I mean, there are other hubs that are not part of the network. And there are hundreds of hubs around North America. And so we can look at those ones that have been operating a lot longer and see the impact. And we're very familiar with them. And we did a project for Ministry of Agriculture. And we interviewed 24 of them to understand their metrics and to understand their impact on the community. And yes, some of them don't have the success that you would hope. But we have brought that knowledge and understanding of what brings success to these food hubs to this business model. And, the feasibility of these models is first and foremost the production and the demand of the product. And so we're very confident that the demand is out there. We went straight to the potential core users and asked them and understood their business and how they were confident in their own business and why they would use this facility and would they be prepared to pay for certain fees for these facilities. And so on top of that is the facility itself and being able to house the facility. So again, having a partner such as Okanagan Crush Pad allows you to have that success. So if we look at other hubs in British Columbia, Plenty of Grace in Surrey, Commissary Connect, like you say, the dock in Port Alberni, they're successful because they have this partnership with a landlord and a facility. Either understands the business, Commissary Connect and Plenty of Grace certainly do, or has facilities in place and that are really suitable for a food hub. And so the answer to your question really is yes, we're very confident in the model. We're very confident in a model within the Okanagan just because of the growing region, because a lot of these businesses that would use the facility are already established and are looking for something like this. And unlike the project in Quesnel, which we did work on, I would say that is a very nascent area that is trying to develop food processes. So they are taking a while to grow, but because they just don't have the processes that you do have already in the Okanagan.
And Darren, if I could just add on to that, because I think it's a really important question to always really drill down and say, do we have enough demand? And one of the things, again, building on the great work that Jane has done, she has developed a list of so many of the potential users that we can just email to make them aware of the services of this hub. And in addition, we've really drilled down on some of the core users, which we've probably got 10 real strong core users who right now face very significant additional costs. They're literally having to take their product all the way to Vancouver, get it processed, and bring it back in order to sell it. And so this hub will fill a very specific need, especially for these core users. And so what we're really bolstered by is that we have specific parties indicating very specific needs that they have. That's a very good starting point, which isn't always the case, as Darren mentioned with the Connell example. So it is still not without risk, this venture, but it's got good momentum.
I just want to follow up and say thank you for that. That is very helpful in understanding the potential for success. Thank you.
On to Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. So my question is regarding in the pre-launch planning phase. And the plan is to hire a project manager to secure grant funding for the setup costs. So where are we going to get the money to hire that project manager? Is the idea that we get a grant funding to hire somebody who will then whose job will to find grant funding?
Yes, that's exactly right. We know that we probably need to be closing in on sort of $1 million of funding secured before we can sort of really move ahead and feel like even hiring the manager who would then start to do the various implementation work would have to be in place. And so that's really the big task is to secure that funding, bring it into the trust, and then use that to make a very strong go, no-go decision on moving forward with the hub.
I'll just say quickly that Community Futures is contributing to all the grant writing at the beginning, no cost to the council or the project. It's something we see as really valuable. So we're going to be presenting that to Pacific Hand shortly.
Yeah, and if I can come as a follow-up to that, thank you, David and Charles. Just from staff's perspective, if council remembers, in my presentation, although it is stated in the business plan, we will be hiring the project manager before establishing the not-for-profit society. This will be conditional on us achieving higher level funding. I think David mentioned at least $1 million before we'd hire that project manager. There is also some, I'd say, some opportunity through our partners and ourselves in maybe designating interim person, whether within our staff team or Community Futures, to stick handle some of the pre-launch planning aspects of this thing if we need to before we actually hire anyone. So that might be something we want to consider. But at some point in time, because of the complexity of the project, we would recommend that we would hire someone to stick handle this before it actually gets opened up to the public, and creating the not-for-profit society, as well as the engaging with users directly, determining their needs, et cetera, is going to be a big job for someone coming in. So thank you.
Follow up, if I may. And then once the hub is up and running, what is the anticipated staff requirements for the hub? Permanent positions.
I'll answer that. We've got a detailed staffing costs and we're looking at probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah, eight staff people that'll grow to a dozen staff people that over the course of the 5 years. So that's and we've sort of identified what those positions are, what their rates would be, and how that will grow over time, and that's included in the labor cost calculations.
Thank you for that. Is that in the business plan? Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'll find it.
Thank you. I had a number of questions written down. They've all been answered except for 2. So I'm wondering, in phase 2, it speaks about the initial service offering. What do you anticipate that might look like?
Thanks. I can jump in from an operational perspective. So certainly the commercial kitchen facility. So allowing, and that would come with, maybe some burners, oven, some kettles. Again, we would have to engage with the core users who would need to use the facility straight away, but it would be nice. And again, it all dependent on the money that we would raise as well. But these businesses really want to go to produce at a bigger level, bigger volume. And so we would have to work with those initial users to see what specialized equipment they would need to produce at a bigger level. So, there is space within the processing facility to house larger equipment, and that might also mean packaging equipment too as well. A lot of these businesses are doing it by hand, and this is the type of equipment they're looking for. So it's all open for discussion. Certainly the storage, the frozen and the chilled storage is of high demand with these core users. A lot of them are storing it on site or in secondary facilities somewhere else within the region. And then that co-packing service was quite interesting, identifying there was a strong need for that. We had some good discussions with another food hub in Surrey, Plenty of Grace, who were pleasantly surprised that there was a big demand for that. And we went back to some of the core users who were very open. In fact, some of them really would like the co-packing service. As you can imagine, they're farmers themselves or doing their own marketing. So for someone to do the processing for them with their recipe and pay the facility to do that is a great benefit for their business. So I think having those core services in place would be a key thing. And then outside of that, we have the meeting rooms to do some training for businesses, various meetings that would be needed. And then if and when we had the volume to kind of support them with any distribution that potentially might be needed as well. I think I've covered off the core ones there.
Thank you, David. I think I may have missed something. Just after the commercial kitchen piece, you were saying that you had to go back to the potential users of the food hub to determine what kind of, equipment you might have in place there. I'm wondering, given that there seems to be a lot of, at least from what I've observed and from what we've heard from you and Brad and others, and in reading the business plan, there seems to be a lot of people that want to process their fruit and vegetables and bottle them or package them in glass jars. I'm wondering if that is part of your considerations for the wet food processing piece of this.
Yeah, Jane, do you want to say anything here about the processing, or? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, sure. There's been a big demand for salsas, chutneys, sauces. So the wet line, the steam kettle would be part of the commercial kitchen processing facility. Like it'll be a nice, where they're using the steam kettle to create their wet products. And those would most likely be in glass jars of varying sizes, and the machinery would be adaptable for that. And then there has been some that said they would like to put it in a pouch bag. So that would have to be discussed, as we meet with the core users in the next to finalize that. But we envision the wet line, including the steam kettle, and then the depositor into the jars to go with that. And if it depends on the volume that people have coming in. One of the things that would be needed is a breakdown line where there's, and we budgeted that for year 2, if I recall, David, where that would be cutting, slicing before it actually goes into the wet line. And then the first year we budgeted for a small dehydrator just to have something available, because we didn't have the budget. Well, it depends on how much funding we get, but we didn't have the budget for a full-on dry line, which is in huge demand for many of the farmers wanting that. But we thought, let's at least have a smaller chamber dryer, test the products, get the drying ratios correct by product type, and that's budgeted for the first year. Does that answer your question?
It almost does.
Okay.
So with this wet line, the bottling included, that will be part of the initial service offering?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
My other question, I think, is for Janine. Janine, I think that you mentioned briefly the subdivision aspect of this, or maybe this is for Brad too. And if I wrote this down correctly, it'll take 6 to 8 months to get that through. I'm wondering, I kind of got a bit of a nod from Brad on that question. I'm wondering, in the timeline it shows June, what for this particular site, other than the funding, it depends on whether or not the Agricultural Land Commission would entertain that subdivision. I'm wondering how long, given that it's perhaps as long as 6 to 8 months, I'm wondering how the timeline will be impacted. I think that when you were speaking, Janine, you mentioned that you were going to talk a bit more about that. I'm wondering if you could do that now, or maybe this is a question for Brad.
I can certainly start us off with that, Brad, if that's all right. So 6 to 8 months is actually, we should look at that as a minimum timeline. Oftentimes the ALC will come back and ask and need more information, which sometimes requires additional studies. It could be geotechnical hydrology studies of that sort. So yeah, we would recommend that process, obviously involving Steve Lorney as well as the landowner. We would recommend that process begin sort of as soon as possible, just to confirm those requirements and those approvals that will be needed from the ALC. And then we need to sort of build that into the overall timeline. So I think David mentioned the earliest we could, anticipate the doors being opened would be, David, what did we say for that? We moved it from June 2023, I think, to 2024, did we?
That's right.
Yes. Yeah. So, and that we also have to consider things like building, in the winter months and how feasible that is. Steve's kept us, aware of the fact that construction materials are harder to find, and the wait time for those is longer at this point. But one important thing about the ALC process I didn't mention, it is in the business plan, but is because OCP is planning to do a significant amount of production in their portion of the building, they meet that 50% rule. It's called the 50% rule, where you have to, if you're building processing facilities on farmland within the ALR, you have to be doing at least 50% of the product from that farm or from holdings owned by that landowner, that farm owner. And because Locomotive's there, Steve's going to be doing his thing, we feel confident that we meet and or exceed that minimum threshold, so that the conversation with the ALC should be, I don't want to say straightforward. I mean, we always hope for that, but it should be, we should have a well-received proposal from that perspective. But yes, the timeline is minimum 6 to 8 months. So if we start the clock on that now, we can create a timeline based around that. If we don't start the clock on that timeline for another month or two, it just really depends on, where capacity's at to move that conversation forward.
Good, thank you, Janine. Brad, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I think that, yes, it'll be roughly 6 to 8 months, I think, for the timeline for a subdivision application that goes through the ALC first. Definitely, we can speed up the process, I think, on our end, which would sometimes slow things down as well. We'd also want to consider, just for council's benefit, subdividing out Garnet Valley Road. Right now, that's currently included as part of the parcel for Garnet Valley Ranch, so that'll involve our infrastructure department through that process in terms of the right-of-way. So that adds a little bit of complexity, but I think again that would be a fairly straightforward process. But I do want to say that I still have a call into the ALC to talk with them. Their planner's on vacation right now for the last 3 weeks. And I'm hoping to get more clarity on the timeline and the requirements, but then passing that on to Steve Lorney as the applicant.
Good, thank you very much. Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Part of the subdivision, will there be is there any indication at full build out what the traffic impact might be truck-wise on Garnet Valley Road? Will we be taking that into consideration? Like 5 tons or whatever vehicles might be coming up and down there, and how much volume?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Van Elfen, that could be something that comes up during the subdivision process. I like I mentioned to council earlier, Mr. Lorney is actually looking at a number of buildings on his property and basically really tying to an agritourism type of theme. It could be a lot more visitors as well, not just truck traffic to his parcel. That could be something that we want to look at, even at a very high level type of perspective, but that has to be again determined through an application process, and it'll be the responsibility of Okanagan Crush Pad to complete that assessment.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know this is probably way off topic, but just to, is Jane still online? It's just unfortunate that there's a large sector of our agricultural community and so much potential in the South Okanagan, which is the livestock industry. And I think David had mentioned there's people that are trucking product to the Lower Mainland to have processed. It's the same with livestock. The closest poultry is an Armstrong processor. The closest large animals such as beef is maybe in Rock Creek if you get lucky. Kamloops is where I had to haul to this year. Hogs is the same. Meat chickens, all those type of things. And there's such a huge demand here for that product that people want to know where their food came from. And I think it's a huge part. I think there's so much opportunity in that sector of agriculture that we're missing out on because of processing. I just thought I'd throw that out there. Thank you.
And did you want Jane to comment?
I can make a comment about that.
Thank you.
This is about 2 years ago, but there was that has been brought up as a definite need, and unfortunately, you can't. For the most part, we can't have plant and vegetable-based products mixed with meat production in the same facility at that scale. But there has been rumblings that something may be brought to the region from another organization, and so if and when that does come to the region, then that could be a referring partner of the hub, just to expand the network. like that spoken hub model.
Thank you, Jean.
Any other questions, Council? All right, any closing comments, Brad? All right, I'd just like to thank on behalf of Council all of the efforts that have been put into this thus far, and I know it's been years of work, and also your presentations today, Darren and Jane and David and Janine and Charles, and of course, Graham for introduction, and Brad as the key District of Summerland person here. This gives us lots of, well, if I could use the word food, lots of food for thought. And I look forward to further discussions this afternoon as we talk about the Memorandum of Understanding. So thank you all so much for taking the time to join us this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, that's the only thing I had on the committee of the whole agenda. I will ask for adjournment, please. Councillor Van Elfen, Councillor Patton, and all in favor. Great, thank you.